Representatives, and the House would then elect the President of the United States, with the runner-up becoming Vice President. Now, as Holmes put it, would you like to read what he wrote, Jackie?
Yes, Manolo. It is apparent that the system of having electors meet in their own states rather than all together as one group serves another purpose. It makes it more difficult for the Electoral College to arrive at a consensus when there is in fact no consensus candidate. The founders envisioned that in most cases no candidate would end up receiving votes from a majority of the electors, so the president would end up being chosen by the House of Representatives from the list of the 5 top electoral vote recipients.
So the people could vote for their state legislators, but it would be the state legislature that selected the members of the Electoral College. The Electoral College, however, prohibited from meeting nationally, would more likely than not be unable to elect a president, and the choice based on the top 5 candidates would actually fall on the House, whose members were elected by the people, or really some of the people, because of course at this time you could only vote if you were white, male, and owned property. Anyway, the whole system was very indirect, and by so doing served as a brake on the sort of popular passions that gave conservative propertied individuals like Washington nightmares. Now, it wasn't until the 1820s that American states began to permit the electorate to have a direct hand in electing the state delegations to the Electoral College. They did so by establishing what is known as the restricted general ticket system. Now, since 1832, this has pretty much been the way state delegations to the Electoral College are selected. Now, this works by voters actually voting not, say, for John McCain or Barack Obama, but for a block of electors pledged in turn to vote for a particular slate in the Electoral College. Now, that block is equal to the number of congressmen and senators each state's entitled to in the U.S. Congress, and that number in turn is determined by the population of each state, formalized every census. Now, every state plus 3 electors for the only non-state entitled to participate, the federal capital, the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C., has a winner-take-all system. That is, the entire block of each state ends up pledged entirely to the presidential and vice presidential slate that wins the popular vote. Although technically, individual electors can still cast their vote for whomever they please. But this happens rarely. In fact, 24 states actually provide punishments for what are called faithless electors, those who break their pledge to vote for candidates based on the state results. Now, only the states of Maine and Nebraska are different. They give 2 electoral votes to the statewide winner and 1 electoral vote to the winner in each of their congressional districts. Now, this Wikipedia map shows you the various electoral college votes of the various states. Now, at present, there are 538 total votes in the Electoral College. Now, for a majority to be achieved, a presidential candidate must obtain 270 votes. Remember, if you don't get 270 votes, the election gets shifted over to the House of Representatives. So it happens like this. Every 4 years, on the Tuesday after the first Monday of November, Americans go to vote. Their votes determine which candidates get the pledges of the state electors. On the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, the pledged electors then meet in the state capitals of their respective states. There, they cast separate ballots for president and vice president. After the new year, the incumbent Vice President of the United States, who is ex officio President of the United States Senate, presides over the canvassing of the Electoral College votes. If there's a majority, the magic number of 270 votes in the Electoral College for each office to be filled, the President and Vice President-elect are proclaimed. If not, then the selection is given over to the House of Representatives. So when we return, how presidential elections are actually 2 numbers games.
A nation destroyed, dwellings in flames, gray hairs bathed in blood, female chastity violated, children writhing on the pike and halberd. It happened in France, but it could happen right here in America if Thomas Jefferson is elected president. Murder, robbery, rape, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The soil will be soaked in blood, and the nation black with crimes. Great God of compassion and justice, shield our country from destruction. Vote Federalist.
Paid for by the Adams 1800 Committee. Alexander Hamilton, Treasurer.
That was from a PBS documentary, and it shows what could have been if there had been television back in the early years of American politics, specifically in 1800. That ad that you just saw is based on the real rhetoric of the times. Now, at first, though, the presidential campaign in the United States was far from being a heatedly partisan affair. George Washington had such a colossal reputation that in the first two presidential elections of the USA, in 1789, here you can see the states that participated, and then in 1792, he won by a landslide without anyone bothering to put up a serious fight, although Adams actually wanted the job. But by 1796, Washington had bowed out, establishing an informal tradition of a two-term presidency that persisted all the way until 1940. Now, for 2 terms, like Quezon and Osmeña, Washington and Adams had basically refused to lift a finger to put themselves forward for high office. But when Adams ran for the presidency, he faced a stiff fight. For something new had emerged on the scene, something Washington himself had hoped to God would never materialize: party politics. This led to a difficulty based on the original design of the presidential election process. Now, if you remember, the winner was supposed to become president, while the runner-up, vice president. Now, this was because everyone was assumed to be serving the country without thought of profit or ambition. But what happens when your affiliation, your friendship, your political friendships becomes a party affiliation, and so that you primarily identify yourself as a member of a party? Washington, for example, himself had to put together a party to support his own administration. And against his party, the Federalists, the opposition formed the Democratic Party, confusingly enough in its early years known as the Republicans. Now, they had Thomas Jefferson as their standard bearer. Each party then, after Washington, put forward candidates. Yet whoever ended president according to the original rules would have the runner-up as his VP. You would thus have a president with a vice president opposed to everything he did all the time. And this is precisely what happened when John Adams, a Federalist or supporter of strong central government, was elected president, with Thomas Jefferson, a states' right advocate, coming in second and so ending up vice president. What Jefferson did when he became president in turn was immediately set out to subvert, when he became vice president, was immediately set out to subvert every initiative of Adams, and he spent 4 years ensuring that 4 years later, in 1800, he, Jefferson, would defeat Adams. But Jefferson, in turn, didn't want to face having whoever challenged him for the presidency do to him as he, Jefferson, had done to Adams. This is why, in 1804, the system was changed so that the electors voted separately for the president and vice president. And as we saw in Part 1, since the 1820s, each state has established the principle that electors are no longer elected by the state legislators, but instead elected by the electorate in each state. The end result of this evolution is that the race for the presidency becomes 2 contests. The first is to get the public to vote for each slate in heavy enough numbers to win the Electoral College delegations of each state. The second is to win the right combination of states. Now, this map in really clear politics shows you how the campaign is playing out right now in the United States. It's the famous red state, blue state divide based on a handy color coding system based on the popularly identified colors of the 2 major parties: red for Republicans, blue for the Democrats. Now, remember, the U.S. Constitution requires whoever ends up president to have a majority of the votes cast in the Electoral College. Now, if a candidate fails to obtain a majority in the Electoral College, remember, too, that this means that the House of Representatives ends up choosing the presidents. Now, this has only happened twice: in 1800, when Jefferson defeated John Adams's bid for re-election, and in 1824, when John Adams's grandson, John Quincy Adams was elected president. More often than not, this means whoever wins the popular vote